Thank you, Osamo. I'm very happy to moderate this panel. Most of my work has been on the waterfront with Barbara Wilks, who's sitting behind me. And we're going to address a couple of different issues. We're going to address, of course, the current situation which has happened here in Prague with flooding. And how do you deal with flooding in terms of urban resiliency? And how do you deal with ecological issues such as flooding? And also deal with social issues and economic needs of the waterfront as well. So the waterfront, I think, when I came to Prague, it was glaring how much of an underutilized resource it was, and how this could be a place for recreation, it could be a place for investment, it could be a place for transportation, and it could be a place, most of all, for a better ecology, a more sustainable city along that corridor. So I think without a more grand introduction, I'm going to introduce three speakers, the first of which is Barbara Wilks. She is the principal and founder of W Architecture and Landscape Architecture in New York. She is a fellow of the American Institute of Architects. She is also a fellow of the American Society of Landscape Architects. She's one of very few people in the United States to be a fellow on both. She's a kind of urban pioneer. She's been doing waterfronts, I think, before a lot of people in the United States were interested in them. And she's going to tell us a little bit about her work in the next presentation. So Barbara, thank you.
Hello. First of all, I want to tell you this is my first time in Prague, so I'm not going to really talk about your issues with the flooding because I don't know anything about them. But I want to know more, so I'm hoping to learn more from you all today. So Reclaiming Waterfronts, that was the title of the talk, and I guess I want to start by talking a little bit about what we mean by that, and then I'll show you a little bit of our work. How do I click? Thank you. Okay, so reclaiming, I think in some ways, we've already really claimed the waterfront. I mean, it used to look like this green image at least in Manhattan. This is Manhattan. This is from Eric Sanderson's book, Mannahatta, which is a wonderful look at how we've changed things. And so we've taken incredible biodiversity around the time of 1600 when Henry Hudson came up the North River at that time. And now we have incredible cultural diversity. And I think this dichotomy, this way of thinking about it as two separate things, is also reflected in our images of nature. And again, forgive me, I'm showing American models, but I think a lot of these have come from European tradition. So, we have this romanticism in the United States about our rivers and the place they hold in our culture. And then there's also a little bit of romanticism now about the city and its history and how that also fits into our culture. And then when we look at what's happening really today on the waterfronts, we find that because of the change of uses, it's very disconnected when you look at it within the urban fabric. This is Baltimore, and there's the lot sizes are bigger, the streets don't go through. It was industrial, now we're changing it back to multi-use, all the things Martin talked about. So there's generally, though, a lack of connection that needs to be overcome. And there's similarly a lack of connection at a much, much bigger scale to these kind of bigger natural environments. This is the same site, the same dot, just looked at it a different way, it's part of the Chesapeake Bay, one of the biggest estuaries in the world. But when you visit the site, really neither of these types of places come to mind. So reclaiming, I think, for us in the 21st century means sort of bringing these two ideas together, that they're no longer about two different kinds of places, that they're really the same place. And how do we do that? And I think we've all had a little bit of a wake-up call, both here in Europe and in the United States, with all the recent natural disasters. So it's a perfect time to talk about it. So this is one of the sites we did right after Sandy. So in terms of resiliency, which is the big word now, there's both the ecological resiliency, and you can see it actually did pretty well. It was totally covered with water, but everything's coming back. And then there's the community resiliency. One of the things they found in New York is that community resiliency had a lot to do with if a place was able to bounce back quickly, if place and people. And the other important thing is to have redundancy. So you have, again, these kind of different scales that you want to consider when you're thinking about a place. You don't just think about the water's edge, but then you also think about how the buildings contribute, and then how the infrastructure, the streets themselves, all the utilities, how everything can work together, not be thought of individually, but can work together all to be, to help with, in this case, stormproofing. So here are some projects. We haven't solved all the problems in our projects, but I'll show you a little bit. So this is in West Harlem in New York. You see the yellow dot and the red line around a site. We started as a master plan. It's a valley. And the red site, the long, narrow site, is our site. And this was very much about community resiliency. This community very much wanted to be connected to the water. It had been cut off from the water for a long time. They had been working to get back to the water for over 30 years at the point where we joined them to help them with their struggle. And this is what the site looked like. It was a big parking lot and totally disconnected by many streets. It was a very traffic-oriented place, not unlike the little bit I did walk around the waterfront of Prague today. I found myself on a little sidewalk, with lots of cars going by. So it was a lot like that, except this didn't even have a sidewalk. This is what it used to look like. It was a very bustling maritime place with lots of river traffic, lots of industry, lots going on. The historic piers were very important. They didn't exist anymore, but they were very important to the community. And so as we started thinking about the project, there was no need to rebuild them as they were historically because different uses today. So we rebuilt them in a way that reflected as if the water were coming in instead of the city moving out. And they're sort of like sandbars coming because this was a cove originally. And so that led to it becoming a great gathering place for the people. Here you see it on a very crowded day. Here it is on a sort of more normal day where people can gather in the cove and look out at the water. And this shows we had to deal with the traffic engineers and DOT narrowing the road, so we had room for a bike trail, which you see on the right-hand side, as well as more park space. And then we had a long-term plan where you could close the road completely if you reworked some of the exit ramps. Then there are the neighborhood connections. Now the sidewalks, as you can see, go straight right on out onto the piers, right on out. You're right in the middle of the water, and you can catch a ferry. Again, there's boat traffic. Looking back from the park, you also look up into the community at certain key entry points. So that connection between the community and the water is really important. And then there's lots of uses, which these all came from community meetings. What did people want to have happen there? And they mostly wanted it to be quiet. They didn't want any big uses, but they did want kayaking and fishing. So we had to we put in a special kayak pier and special fish cleaning station. Special features like a water feature for the kids, which a day like this would be really wonderful. I can imagine running around in it. Again, these piers, which because of their angles, help expand. It was a very narrow site. So using these natural geometries of diagonals really gave the site a much bigger character. And they also provided multiple pathways and edges, and people like to hang out along edges, so the more of them that you have, the more places you have for people to hang out, as well as bicycles and places to stop in between the paths so you see everybody and watch everybody. Okay, so that's all the sort of social aspects that we were trying to improve. As far as other aspects, like ecological, in New York, we have this problem with our storm water system, which also, when it rains a lot, the sewers, there's not enough capacity, and so we get overflows of water with sewage in it into our rivers, which is obviously not a good thing. So to help with that, the more porosity that you have in the land, the better off you are, because the water doesn't have to go into the pipe. It can soak naturally down into the land, and you're not pushing it right out into the river. So this park has sort of a modest 35% increase in permeability. You still need hard surfaces because when you have a lot of people, that's maintainable. But we tried to do as much porosity as we could, so that helps with the environment. But this led us to think about a research project where we noticed that there are lots of places where streets have a lot of runoff, coming down from the community. And in our community, we're also coastal, so there's also the potential for rising water levels. And so you can take, I took this room from the river from the Dutch. That's what they're starting to do now. But you can take a vacant street that dead ends at the water that used to serve industries, and you can turn it into a pedestrian place for people. And the water can come up it, and people can go down. And we actually did this on our next project that we worked on in the city. This is called The Edge, over on the East River in Williamsburg. So this used to be a street, just like that picture. And now it's a place where people can gather. It will slopes down to the river, and it will slope down even further in the next phase till you can touch the water. And this is a section. You can also hide things. You can use the section of the natural amphitheater looking at the river, again, creating those multiple edges to hide things underneath, like parking in this case. And it really just gives people a better opportunity to see what's going on. This is what it looks like on top of the parking. The other issue in New York is, again, the coastal. We are that coastal as well as the tides. This is Sandy, obviously, was a coastal event. And we had lost all that electricity. People are out of work and out of their places for, weeks to months. $60 million or more, is still counting. So it was a real tragedy. A lot of this, back to that picture I showed at the beginning with all the green, that we used to have just in Manhattan, over 1,000 acres of wetland. Right now we have, less than 100. So there's no buffering to stop any of the storm surge. So this is another research project that we did in New York for the Center for Architecture, where we took the dredge that they're continually dredging out of the harbor for the ships, and decided we talked to some boaters, and they said, the Hudson River is just really so wide. There's no places to rest and stop, no places of refuge. So by making little islands up and down the Hudson on both sides, you can make it a much safer place to kayak and much more friendly for people, but also much more friendly for animals and help with storms. This last project is one that's in Canada, actually, and the project is the island that you see in the foreground. It's a 30-acre island that we're working on a park for. And the problem here really was that it was a park, but nobody went there. There was nothing to do. There was no interaction with the water. The island really had been taken totally out of the stream, so to speak. You might as well be on a park somewhere else. You didn't really know you were in the middle of the river. So we studied the patterns of the river as it used to be and found that actually it used to be a series of islands that it had been filled over time that people just didn't remember. So our project was to take back, actually add channels that people could go in and explore because they're controlled and they're safer than the actual currents in the river. So people can, play with the water and explore and find things. We took the land that we scooped out to make those channels, and we're making a big hill in the middle of the island, which people then can sit on and look back at the city and have wonderful views, or they can sled, because this is in Canada where it's cold. And there's many activities, but it's still basically an ecological park right in the middle of the city. So I will end on that the really important thing is to bring all these different issues together anytime you do a project, and try to find ways to find intersections between them so that you're always, helping out little by little on all these big problems that we all face.
Thank you, Barbara. It's always nice to see your own work on the screen when you're actually not having to present it, so thank you. Barbara has done a remarkable job, again, working on waterfronts, working on urban spaces, and she's been doing it for more than 20 years now. Is that right?
40 years.
40 years. I was trying to make her seem younger. Our next speaker is Guinness Garrido, founding partner of Burgos y Garrido Arquitectos and Asociados in Madrid. He's trained as an architect at the School of Architecture in Madrid, and he's been a visiting scholar at Harvard GSD and Universidad Central Santiago de Chile and Tucson. He's a founding partner, as I said, and their work on Madrid Rio Park has been published widely around the world, and we're excited to hear from you. Guinness, thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, I'm going to show you a very specific project that we did. We was working in the last 8 years in Madrid. That is the reinvention of the river sides of the river Manzanares in Madrid. Well, I have to go a little bit back because if not, it's very difficult to understand the project. That it was extremely complex, with the size of the famous Big Dig in Boston, something like that. That it involved an extremely complex work of tunneling the highways that it was built in both sides of the river, and the supplies and the utilities of the city that usually are built in the same places that the highways. Well, like in many places, many cities, the river in Madrid was the backyard of the city. So it was the place in which the waste goes out from the city. And in the 70s, the city built the ring roads of the city, and some of them over or in the sides of the creeks that exist in the city, and also in the river that is, of course, a very small small river. Well, this is the first ring road that is we call the N30. You can see that runs from the north to the south in the east part of the city, along or covering a creek that exists in the city, because Madrid is a hilly city. And in the west, the highway was built in both sides of the river. Well, the river is a very small river, and it was canalized completely in the 30s. So we can understand the river like a completely artificial canal. So the nature, it doesn't exist really there. Well, this is one of the junction of the net that the highway has over the river, and you can see here, well, what's happening in the border that was completely occupied by the highway, and the river was completely inaccessible, completely cut from the urban tissue, so nobody could go along or across the river because the highway was built in both sides. And the river is very close to the city center. This we can see here in your right side of the image, a little part of the Royal Palace, and these gardens is the gardens that belongs to the Royal Palace. So the ring road was built really in a very central space in the city. Well, 10 years ago, the city council decided to renovate this first ring road, building because the ring road was built in a very informal way, just building behind or building running after or running behind the demand of the traffic, and the junction was very bad design, and sometimes they use the streets of the urban tissue for making the combinations, and the city council decided to renovate the east part of the ring road of the N30, this that we call the first ring road that Madrid has. And in the borders of the river, the city council decided to cut and cover, to make a tunnel along this along the between 6 and 8 kilometers in which the highway was in the border of the river. They built this incredible and extremely complex work in 4 years. So something really like a miracle. We can see here an image of this process because, of course, they make the tunnel under the highway, but without cutting the flow of the traffic. So it's something extremely complex. And mainly, they have to move all the supplies and the utilities of the city to put in other places for making the tunnels. This is the same place that we saw. Well, we can recognize perhaps a little part of the buildings in the upper part of the slide. And here we can see what is the final image. And in the 2005, we won a competition, a big team of 3 offices from Madrid and 1 office from Holland. And we was working in the last 8 years in the trying to reinvent the borders of the river, designing mainly a big park over the slabs of the highway. This is a very important thing because this is not really a park. This is a completely artificial landscape because more than 60% of the surface in which we work was an artificial slabs of concrete, so without earth. So it's like a enormous or giant plot or pot, and I'm going to show you very briefly this project. Well, I think we won the competition because we understand that this could be a fantastic opportunity for the city to connect the landscape that the city has in the north part, because Madrid is very near to the mountains, and along the river there is a path of very good, very well maintained and very well with a high valuable forest that goes from the north, that is in the mountains, to the south along the river. And the same happened in the south because the city grows mainly going to the southwest and going to the northeast, maintaining without occupying the borders of the city, of the river, but not in the part in which the highway was built. So we understand that trying to understand the landscape that we have in the borders, we have in the outskirts of the city, we can put this landscape over the highway, building the fiction of a new connection between this valuable landscape that belong to our culture and our image of ourselves. So this is the final situation, just to make a connection between this valuable landscape that there are in the south and in the north. And I think we won the competition mainly because this was the main idea, and our competitors don't understand that this could be a fantastic opportunity for make a new infrastructure of green or public spaces over the mobility infrastructure. Well, I can show you the project that is extremely big and complex in just showing 3 parts. First, along the river in the right side, in the part that is outside the central part of the city, we propose what we call a Pines Promenade. This is the section.
I'm going to ask you just one more minute, because we have to go to the next presentation and then the discussion.
Okay.
Thank you.
This is the section that we can understand. We are going to repeat along the right side with the pines over the highway. And this is the final image in which we can understand that the highway is under these pines. Well, this is I understand, like make the project comprehensive for the people, and the strong and with some kind of a unity, so you can run or you can walk along the river, feeling the same atmosphere. This is another images of the place in which is well, there are benches and many amenities that you can use. The second part is the historic connections, and I'm going to show you very briefly because we find some traces that very valuable over there near the Royal Palace. And this is some images of the gardens that we designed in this part, trying to understand what's happened here with the history. And the third part is what we call riverbed memories, trying to make a fiesta with the water, because Madrid is a very dry place, but the river has historically meanders and lakes and so on. And we designed a park with trying to build or reinvent in some way this atmosphere of the riverside, of the riverbed that it was, I don't know, 1,000 years ago.
Okay, thank you, Ines.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. Now, we are very lucky to have the head and director of the Office for Public Space in the City Development Authority of Prague, Pavla Melkova. She's educated as an architect, born in Prague, educated at the Faculty of Architecture, CTU. She's been a partner at MCA Studio since 1996, and she's working, I think, from what I hear from my colleagues and friends, tirelessly to improve public space issues and also try to define them in Prague. And she's going to spend 7 minutes defining them for us right now. Thank you, Pavla. And this is going to be in Czech.
Dobré odpoledne.
Good afternoon.
Já nebudu mluvit o příkladech hotových věcí.
I will not expound on case studies. I will cover objectives that the city of Prague has for its riverfronts and waterfronts. Not that we do not have anything to present. We do have installations, we do have projects already accomplished, but since we are going through a lot of change, a lot of transformation, I think it's worthwhile to introduce our policies and objectives. About a year ago, my office was founded on the initiative of our new mayor. He was a mayor then, Mr. Hudeček. He founded the Public Space Office and the Metropolitan Planning Office. At the same time, the Public Space Office is nearly physically on the river, which is symbolic. My office and its foundation was a gesture through which the city said that the public space has been made a priority. The office seeks to formulate policies for development and coordination of public spaces on the urban planning side, because the office is not a place for architecture itself, but we have a lot of external collaborators. We have a large team of core staff and external collaborators to make our visions and objectives a reality. One of the larger projects we have embarked on is the concept design for Prague Waterfront. It's in its early stages, so let me just recount the overall objectives. It may sound trivial or cliched even, but Prague Waterfronts should be an important public space for the city. It does sound indeed like a cliche, but when the city makes a declaration of this caliber, it then needs to follow up with why it should be, the waterfront should be a public space for the whole city and how it wants to achieve that. The river is the horizon to which the city urbanism is relating. And the river also is a place of the urbanistic tensions. The river has made it into the, let's say, popular language in which there are many references to the right, left bank and so on. So it is already an important part of the city life. And it is the space that is shared by all residents. Everybody feels like they own parts of the river. So why or how should the city proceed, having declared that it wants to make the riverfront a priority? It is necessary for the riverfront to be accessible, understandable in the broader context. The river is also a natural communication artery that should not be hampered by barriers. But it should stay open to cyclists, not necessarily to cars. Our designs, our projects for the river side developments rely on the definition of the ideal situation, a part of which is that the immediate the river side and the immediate areas should not be privatized, allowing for functions that would not be in line with the city's objectives and plans for the river. The river in Prague, in its central part, where it is a regulated urban space, and in the outer parts of Prague, because the river flows through the city, and not only in the middle, but also through the outer parts of Prague. The character of the outer river fronts is also very well. It has some innate charm, so we do not want to change it. We do not want to clutter it with new attractions and functions. We just want to preserve it as it is and keep it accessible to people. We do not want some Disneylands being built up there. We just want the river to be some place where people will naturally go to sit down, to observe, to lie down in the grass, to eat, to meet, and for some limited cultural life too. I put my presentation together before the recent floodings. So this picture was already there before the most recent floods, but it has become even more current and topical of lately. Throughout the history, the river had a completely different function. It was mainly an economic vehicle, a route of commerce and trade. The flooding has always been there, looming in the background as a threat. But with the changes in the lifestyles and with the changes in the perception of what makes a city livable, we now are discovering the potential of the river, and we are fully aware of its importance to the city. On the other hand, it's very hard to do it right. We do not want to, and as much as we would be inclined to, we do not want to clutter the river with, features and gimmicks. We want to preserve it as it is. When we looked to some international cases and projects from which we drew our inspirations, we asked the people, well, don't you have why don't you have benches here? It's don't you have floodings? And said, yeah, we do, but we would just after it's damaged, when it's damaged, we just put them
wonderful
back up.
presentations. Thank you with the diversity. Now we're going to open this to discussion amongst the group, and if we have time, we're going to open it to the audience. Joining us in the discussion is, I think, Mr. Vini Mas from MVRDV is in the back, and he may be coming to join us momentarily. Mr. Adrian Benepe, the former Commissioner of Parks from the City of New York, and the current Executive Vice President and Director of City Parks Program for the Trust for Public Land. Mr. Benepe has spent 12 years with the City Parks and Recreation Department. I wouldn't say single-handedly, but almost single-handedly with the support of Mayor Bloomberg, transforming the way parks are viewed and the way parks are used in New York City, also the way they're financed, and he's going to comment on this. Vladimir Sita is the founder of Terragram from Sydney. He is a groundbreaking studio who's produced groundbreaking publication on landscape architecture and urban design. He's worked on a range of projects and competitions in Australia and also in Asia. And he's now living in Prague, as I understand, and teaching at the Faculty of Architecture, Czech Technical University, to do what I came here last year to do as a Fulbright, was to teach landscape architecture to architects. So I think it's a very noble cause, and it's a very difficult task. So thank you. And we know Maria Ayalova from Terraform One. She just presented previously, and we're going to tap her for the projects on sort of resilient infrastructure that you talked about with One Lab. So some of the words that and Mr. Vini Mas has joined us, so thank you for coming. He's going to be speaking after this session for the last keynote of the day. We're honored to have you. The words that came to mind or that I wrote down were tension, simplicity, forces, both urban and natural, conflict, cyclists, resilience, financing. That was a word I came up with. Also, partnerships and sharing. Sharing the edge, I suppose. So I think starting with tension, and I think it would be interesting to hear from Vladimir Sita, who's a native Czech, then moved to Sydney and spent his career, most of his career working there. What's your opinion of the waterfront? What's happening, and how is it from an outsider almost?
Well, I can only refer to Australian waterfronts because I have no experience with the Czech waterfronts except of recent spectacular floods in Prague. Preserving waterfronts could be a dangerous activity for people who try to preserve them. I have to go back to when, about 30 years ago, Juanita Nelson tried to preserve waterfronts to stop it from overdevelopment, and she disappeared and was never found. Speculation is that she ended somewhere in footings of subsequent development. Sydney currently is of course blessed by a visionary Lord Mayor who is independent, and she embarked on unprecedented renewal of urban spaces and waterfronts. Australia, of course, it's Westminster political system, which means nothing ever happens in a radical way. There are two parties, and they share roughly 50-50 the power. So it means that no decisions are so easily made. So Sydney consists of many fiefdoms which means like municipalities, and CBD, it's of course blessed by having banks and other taxpayers present. So it means that there are certain schizophrenic developments alongside Sydney waterfronts. Sydney is very big, so Sydney it's like, I don't know how many Pragues in the extent. It's from one end to the other, it's about 70 kilometers, so it's more or less like Concordia. Somebody said, there are no suburbs in Australia because there is no herb to be sub. To a degree, it's actually true. We have very dense CBD with very prime waterfront with incredibly expensive real estate values. So it means every square inch of waterfront is very precious. And thanks to Chloe Moore, who is the independent Lord Mayor, the city purchased at very great expense places on waterfront and turned them into public spaces. A city like Sydney doesn't need big spaces on waterfront, it's just the access. And what's good about Australian political system is that you can't actually own waterfront, you can't own the shore, you can't privatize it. So it's protected.
For advertising as well?
What?
Is it also for advertising? You can't privatize it in terms of commercial interest?
Well, that's a different issue. Privatizing of public space with the commercial overdevelopment or restaurants spreading everywhere, that's of course happening, but it's a temporary pollution because you can actually, if global warming is going to really happen, I think that the issue of privatizing some of those spaces will be gone. Obviously, it will be just one tsunami or something like that would fix it. But I think that's different to American system, that you can't actually own the access. And I personally believe that every inch of this open space should be declared, or open or space in the city should be declared res publica, because I'm finishing now, but I heard that in some previous discussion there is no ecological value to some space in the city. I think there should be a pillory for people like this when they say that that it's a large space in this case it's Prague, and they say there's no ecological value. For God's sake, how can you say this? Thank you.
No, it's a good point. You can keep the microphone there. It's a good point. Vinnie Maas has worked in mostly all over the world, but a lot in the Netherlands on this issue. And Maria gave us a talk before about infrastructure and sharing the boundaries of the city. And I'd asked Maria, and I'll preface this by saying New York City had Hurricane Sandy. We've been talking about flooding for years. Barbara presented some images from the hurricane. Our parks did quite well in the hurricane. They absorbed the water as they should have, and the water receded, and we have now a nice coastline for people to enjoy. Mayor Bloomberg in New York just came out with a $20 billion plan on last Monday, maybe, which deals with all the impacts of Hurricane Sandy and how we're going to address this over the next 20 or 30 years, or maybe 50 years. And $20 billion worth of soft infrastructure and also hard infrastructure. Adrian can probably talk a little bit about this, but I think first, Maria, if you can talk about this word resiliency. What is it? It seems like it's kind of bullshit. It's everyone's using this word, and we maybe even shouldn't use it, but you used it also. So, what is it?
Well, is this on? It's the idea that we should learn to live with, the extreme circumstances that are brought to us by climate change, and then how do we deal with it? And then I think it's maybe a better word is kind of going back and adapting. As Barbara pointed out, a lot of big cities are built on estuaries, and estuaries are places where the rivers meet the ocean, and they by nature have water coming in and out. And I think it's probably cartographers' fault, where they drew kind of the maps and they delineated the rivers as a hard edge, and it's a hard edge. So and then that resulted in seawalls walls and so forth. And now we're trying to protect that hard edge, where if we go back to what was kind of the natural way to receive the water in extreme events and then let it go out, then we can inhabit that edge and expand it both ways without having to worry about the extreme damage that the hurricane caused. And then we've all seen the maps, like what will happen with the rising sea current. Hurricane Sandy demonstrated to us visually in New York, because we saw how much land we're going to lose when the water rises to a certain level. So now it's the opportunity to rethink that and then instead of just kind of building all this infrastructure, and a lot of it's needed to protect what is there today, but to think about how to let the water in.
Yeah. And if you're going to let the water in a city like Prague, I mean, Adrian, how does it work in terms of like the municipality? Like, how is Bloomberg going to do this with $20 billion? And how is it going to be maybe talked about with the community, or is it going to not be talked about?
Well, I think more than at any time in our history, we understand as human beings, as residents of this planet, and particularly as city livers, that water is destiny. It is absolutely our destiny. Whether it's the fact that without a supply of clean drinking water and water to put out fires and flush toilets and cook and eat with, a city wouldn't last for a day. Or the fact that cities, most of the great cities of the world were established because of their access to ports and rivers and maritime trade. And almost all of the great cities of the world are at sea level, to be affected by rising ocean levels, and if they're not at sea level, they're next to rivers. And I heard recently that it was a proven fact that we had more extreme weather events in the last year than we've had in our recorded history. So whether you believe or not in global climate change, and I'm a believer because I've seen firsthand that, the fact that we have 100-year storms and 50-year storms and 100-year floods and 50-year floods happening every 10 or 20 years now is telling us something. So what do? We have to respect water. It's the most powerful force. If you own a home, you know that there's always a leak. You redo the roof and there will still be a leak because water is more powerful than anything you do. And somebody once asked me the question, are we destroyers of nature, or will nature destroy us? And I think it's both. Because of what we've done to the climate, because of our carbon output, because of increasing heat and global climate change, we are creating the forces that could destroy us. Now, this is not the time to panic. Do we invite the water in? If you go to the Netherlands, they are inviting the water in after spending the last 50 years building dikes and levees to keep the water out. They're now building landscapes designed to flood. A recent exhibition at the Museum of Modern Art, Rising Currents, had many very visionary, almost crazy ideas about what to do with New York with rising sea levels. This was 3 years ago, by the way, before the hurricane hit. But including in some of those ideas were, many of them had the ideas of inviting the water in and having our streets, instead of being impermeable, become pervious. So the storm water comes in, the rainwater goes down. You cannot create new freshwater wetlands in the center of Prague on the edge of the Vltava River, because this is a historic city and was built to the edge of the river. But you can look, as they're doing in the United States, outside of the cities and expand your floodplains and let the water go out into those floodplains and move people away from the edge of the river. That's what's happening in the United States. You can, and I think you should consider in Prague, capturing stormwater. I see a city as I walk around that is almost all impermeable. There's very few green places, especially in the historic areas, that capture stormwater. You could probably reduce some of your flooding by having much more permeability. But we have to, I think the lesson here for architects, engineers, landscape architects, the most important thing to think about, and most of you know this from your training, is water. And everything else follows from that.
Just want to say, we are nature, we're not.
It's that we're part of the system too. Yeah. And is this, Pavla, is this what we're talking about, how, from the city perspective, how does the city of Prague deal with this? And from what I learned when I was here, people weren't really taking the issue so seriously. I mean, of course, flood walls have been put up and they're erected and then taken down after the floods, but then I wonder what's going to happen next. Will the city deal with it, or will they deal with this on like a regional level, like Adrian's talking about? Will there be expansion of floodplains? And how is your office going to propose new spaces on the river that can deal with both this ecological nightmare of flooding and also the nightmare that people can't even walk down and touch the water? How is your office dealing with this?
Tak Praha v centru má vybudovanou protipovodní ochranu. V tom problém není.
Well, Prague does have anti-flood barriers or flood barriers in the center of the city. That's not where the issue is. The problem I mentioned was related to the fact that the lower levels of the river floodplains are being flooded. Prague is basically built above that level, well beyond that level, but the problem was to make sure that the waterfronts are built in a way that allows you to let the water come in and then recede without those facilities being destroyed. And what was the major problem in the latest case was the flooding of those parts of Prague where the flood barriers were not available or had not been available before the floods. And sometimes sometimes there are places where it doesn't really make sense to protect a particular area because it's probably better to let it flood. But it's going to be a difficult task to communicate this to the public and to discuss this with the public. And yes, this will be one of the issues, to extend possibly the flood areas.
And is there interest in the part of the public to deal with this issue on a more long-term basis?
Are you asking about the flood barriers, right? Are there people who are interested? Are the public interested? Well, of course, yes, people are interested, particularly in those parts that were flooded. But it will be about balancing, balancing out the reasonable solutions and the people's ideas. You might be able to protect some parts of Prague, but not others, perhaps, or perhaps to a lesser extent, like the zoo in Troja. It's you get something, you have to give something. It's you simply move the problem just downstream.
Right. The question wasn't necessarily people interested in flood barriers. Of course, that's something that is interesting to people to protect their homes and property. But is there interest on a sort of larger scale move to get both access to the water and then create a system within or outside the city that's a bigger, longer-term solution than temporary flood barriers? And maybe it's not for you to answer solely, but also for Guinness and Vini to step in and tell us what happened in Madrid and Rotterdam that's been done to deal with these issues, and is it solely done by the mayor? Is it pushed from by the community? I think it's important to understand how these projects really start and what the catalyst is. What is the catalyst? Is it political? Is it economic or social?
Some things to add to the discussion. I think wise things have been said already by different people. The issue of, I think the issue of resilience as a word that's like in fashion flowing around in our faculties at the moment, it's quite useful because it's why? Because it makes us aware about the need for adaptivity, as you said, and to advocate knowledge about that and to show that to our governors in that way, and to calculate. Say basically the budgets that are needed to somehow add that in our projects. So that's the good part. Of course, we cannot solve, as you said. There's always a leakage and always everything. Resilience is not only water, to be honest. It's also safety of traffic or environmental elements or social resilience or agricultural resilience are other things that we could do. So yes, let's exchange that to the max. So that's the good part already of your study. What can we learn from Rotterdam? I will show you later, not Rotterdam, but I will show you Bordeaux, because we're mainly working on local plans, both in Bordeaux, Strasbourg, Basel, and so they have, and all, they deal with a kind of contradiction, and I think that's very elementary of life, that we want to live next to a river, and we have to solve it. We need to make, so I think, and of course it's hard to say at the moment, say a week after a disaster, but somehow to not be scared to find solutions where this contradiction can be shared somehow, or cherished, is what these places will learn. There's one experience I can give from Rotterdam at that moment. There is, if there's one country, yes, that works already with one hand protecting itself against the water and allowing behind the dikes to have even more water because of the contradiction that you were pointing at, I think is a fantastic solution. But the one thing is, when I compare that to France or to Switzerland, the insurance laws in the Netherlands are already much more aware and accessible by people that when there is a flood and we raise our buildings, and yes, by about like a meter, so when there is water going into our foundations, into this 1 meter zone, that somehow the insurance is connected, our insurance system is connected to that. So at one hand, there's a technical solution there that's there and that's applied already in Hamburg afterwards in the Wasserstadt. That's a kind of, say, normal for about, I think, 6 million people in the Netherlands, and in combination with that kind of financing system, which is simply an insurance system that makes it also possible to ultimately to do it. How long did it take? How many disasters did it take in the Netherlands? 4 disasters, 200 years. So that's, I hope that we can accelerate.
4, yeah. So in some ways, New York's becoming more progressive because we've had really one scare in 2011 and one disaster in 2013. So Guinness, maybe Winnie talked about resiliency and transportation, and I think the issue of cars on the riverfront is hugely problematic. It's a problem here in Prague. It's a problem on most cities in America. I think might have started this trend is to putting all the shitty infrastructure and roadways along the riverfronts and along oceans. So there's also a push against this in Prague now. Like the Tomáš Kak presented the Tempo 30 plan that organization and Automat here work to close down a Smetanova Nábřeží, which is along the riverfront. They do that like once a week now. So it's stuff's starting to turn. And in Madrid, I mean, geez, you took out all of those highways to create public space.
Yeah, well, I have to say that Madrid is an extremely dense city. So for that, this is very sustainable. So because you can walk to many places, the public transport is very good because it's very efficient because the city is very compact. So well, we was very highly criticized when we did the project because many people understand the project like something completely the opportunity for renaturalize the border of the city, of the river. And it was completely absurd because we are in a completely artificial place. Not only because the highway, not only because we built the park over the highway, because we are more in a square than in a park. And how to combine sustainable cities, that means for me dense cities, and ecological terms is not so easy. And if you add what's happening with the highways and the infrastructures that mainly are in the borders of the river banks or in the water or in the sea, it's not so easy to deal with. Well, we thought 10 years ago that it was a very bad idea to make the tunnels because it was extremely expensive. And we thought, well, we have to put the highway in another place. And then we have to reinvent the border of the city in a more lateral way. But this is a very complex way. So for that, the engineers think in a very pragmatic and direct way. Well, just put the highway on the ground because it's easier, because we cannot, it's not necessary to buy land because we cannot modify the general plan of the city. So, and then I think it was a good idea. After 10 years, I think they make a good decision. Well, we put over the highway this park, and the design of the park or design of the public space was completely determined by the highway, because the highway has emergency exist, had many determinations that at the end are in the surface, and how to combine or how to make decisions in between the engineering and the landscape or the architecture, it was perhaps could be making another in a better way. So if you don't want to move the highway, you have to put in the same place underground. But perhaps if the collaboration between engineering and the architect or the planners or the urban designer was more transparent, perhaps it's possible to save a lot of money, because perhaps it's not necessary to underground the whole thing. Perhaps you can minimize the cost of the build, the infrastructure.
So I think we've probably got 10 or 15 minutes left in this session, and maybe Pavla could ask a question. Maybe I think it's a good opportunity to maybe get at some of the issues that are concerning you with public space on the waterfront.
Já jsem se pokoušela, už tam ta prezentace není, vlastně ty otázky nějakým způsobem.
We don't see that presentation anymore, but I actually did try to bring up the issues that are the burning issues for us, we specifically address. And in the context of floods, I try to list those items that are particularly burning to us. But I'm talking about water, transport, for tourist purposes and freight. And we were thinking about how to balance this in industrial technical capacity of the river and the, let's say, tourist potential of the waterfront, because the fact is that the river is sort of getting busy and busier by using it for ships and yards. And on the other hand, it's a place, the rivers are a place for people to stay and enjoy themselves. But on the other hand, you need to realize that the rivers are simply intended also for boat traffic, for ships. So it was one of the issues that we were trying to address, how to balance out the transport functionality in its natural dimension and the waterfront facility for people.
Yeah, and one of the things that I noticed is most of the ship traffic on the Vltava is tourist boats. It's guys from London going out and getting drunk on stag parties or something. So I think that the riverfront could be a working riverfront, and I think that's probably the most interesting riverfront in a city, when you have real commerce and real boats coming in and out of the city, and that's really why we're talking about reclaiming it, because I think it could be reclaimed for that purpose as well as for personal social use.
I think for most cities, we say we're going back to the water, but in most cities, the river has been used just for commerce and all of the things to move materials and goods, factories, pollution control plants, transportation. So now we're going back for the first time to open up the water to people and recreational use. At the same time, and also residential housing, at the same time we're confronting more flooding and ocean storms. So we have this interesting paradox. I would say one thing that all cities should keep in mind, including Prague, is that you have an opportunity every time you have a need to build a defense system. Now we're talking about coastal defense systems on the east coast of the United States. But every time you have a need to build a defense system, you should always be keeping in mind the layers of use and usefulness. So for example, if you build a levee or a barrier, make it park-like and beautiful with a path going across it and benches for people to sit. Make everything serve multiple purposes. If you're capturing stormwater runoff in the street, make it green so that it's photosynthesizing, absorbing carbon, giving you oxygen, attracting animals, so that the big risk now in the cities that face rising water is building big, ugly infrastructure to keep the water out and killing the very purpose of having a city. There is no great city without great public space, and you can take the opportunity of creating waterfront barriers or places to capture stormwater, floodplains, and create good public space.
Yeah. Barbara had maybe one thing to add, then I'm going to bring it to the audience, and we'll do the last few minutes in questions.
I only wanted to say there's a good example in New York where they have recently instituted several new ferry routes to get new ways to move people around. So I noticed on your map how, the river's the center might be something, then people get on the river, people actually have gateways to the neighborhoods in new ways, and it gives you new ways to see the city. So it's, and it's relatively, for infrastructure, relatively inexpensive.
And those can also be catalysts for public space design because you have now a point on the river which is more active because it has boats or ferries coming to it, and it becomes a transport system that people are passing through. So I think it's actually a way to catalyze the project in terms of like an infrastructure perspective.
I just wanted to say that Sydney started as a working harbour. Now that working has been removed and it became just very expensive for real estate. And it actually sort of disinfected the whole waterfront because that spectacle, that film, almost like a moving boat, things happening. Now it's all very artificial. They say ferry traffic is very expensive, so the ferries are disappearing and it becomes just a leisure ground for very rich people. So Sydney now, when they want to activate waterfront, they put coffee shop there or another restaurant and so on. I think what we need now, it's about 20,000 Latinos moving to Sydney to activate our public spaces because they're just we don't know how to use them. So Prague is blessed by having this compression, the city actually coming very close to the edge. So it's just like a really... If you have too much of that, it doesn't work either.
So tomorrow, Enrique Peñalosa is going to be speaking, and we can ask him to come to Sydney to activate your waterfront. I'm sure he'd be happy to do it. I'm going to ask Milota to gather some questions from the audience. Are there any from you?
Hello. So do we have questions?
You're hot.
Yeah. Some water.
Okay, if we have one question in the front, or two. Yep.
Well, actually, I don't have a question, but I just had a remark that I really liked. Last words of Adrian. I'm Dutch, and I lived for 7 years in Bratislava, and people always tell me like, "Oh, aren't you scared in Holland with all this water and living below the seawater?" And I can tell you that never in my life I felt any fear. I live in The Hague, which is right by the sea, but a few weeks ago, or what was it, 2 weeks ago, 1 week ago, I went with my daughter, and I went as every other Bratislavan citizen. I went to look at the river, and this was really an opportunity. There were like masses of people. They were going on the bridges, going to watch, and we're like making a tour around the wall, basically. And looking there and seeing all these people and seeing all these, like, you have first a concrete wall that is always there, that is really scary to me. And then there was another wall built on top of that, which is like the extra wall. And that was the first time actually that I really felt fear for water. This is really, for me, an interesting experience, but at the same time I realized this horrible wall is protecting us, but it doesn't come to my mind that it's really a solution, So basically it's more a question. Also, I know that the main architect of Bratislava is also here, and also for Prague, maybe it's also in the minds of people and in the way that the country works. It's very privatized. I have the feeling in Bratislava there's no openness to the water. And it seems like this is the only solution. Resilience is a good word. So that was just my contribution.
Thank you. There is one more question behind. Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, and we have another from Poland.
I would like to ask about one issue which is talked about a lot in Prague, and this is housing at the waterfront. There is a big demand on housing. There are many projects, housing projects on the waterfront, but it also means privatization of the waterfront. What do you think about this issue, housing and building new houses next to the river?
One possible solution is what we have in New York, believe it or not. New York, the capital of capitalism. In New York, you cannot build on the waterfront, even with your private property, without creating a public park in front of your private property. So one of the project that Barbara showed, the second project is called The Edge. It's in front of a very fancy condo in Williamsburg, but there's something in New York called the waterfront zoning text. Beginning about 20 years ago, everything that is built along the water must have at least a 50-foot wide public access, built at the expense of the developer and maintained at the expense of the developer. And the developer can either maintain it himself or pay the city to maintain it. And that's how a number of new parks have been created along the water's edge in New York, all at private expense for public benefit. And that's just the law. You want to build on the river, you have to build a park.
4 minutes, and some questions.
I am from Wrocław. It is near in Poland. We have very large flood, 1997. And my question is to a colleague from Rotterdam, because I am very jealous of Prague, because these here are mountains, and you have your embankment very high. Of course, partially low, but generally high, and it is easier to make embankment attractive for people. But my city is very flat, awful flat. So a majority of embankments are dikes, and this area behind dikes is impossible to do anything. 50 meters is forbidden to build anything. So it's very difficult to find something attractive for people, for recreational function. Because if you stand on the dike, it's beautiful because you have view to the river. You have behind the dikes. You haven't seen the river, and this is not so attractive. And about 70% along our rivers, we have 7 rivers in my city, we have embankments, high dikes. It is something similar, I think, like Holland. So what is your advice? How to attract this area? It is not visible to river for recreational function. Thank you very much.
I agree with the dikes, of course. And then there are, and the beauty of it, when you over it, you're in the wind and you can see over everything as long as it's low. And as the buildings are not high. So that's one thing what I like also with dikes is because the boulders are not too big. So the smaller they are, the many dikes you have, you can somehow control the water system in case of disasters. So I do think that the Zeeland, the southern part of the Netherlands, has one of the best systems now with this kind of, say, dividing the possible power when water is there by having smaller polders everywhere. So you can play with it. That's for better and for worse, of course. So about the invisibility. Yeah, that's... there is the real estate prices along the dikes in the Netherlands are the highest of the polders because you live next to a viewing point. So you don't have the view, but you go. You can have in 20 meters. You go up and you see. You have that view, and so more than when you have, say, in the middle of the polder, which is also a view, but it's a little boring view, because the view is about, in the end, nature, as you were indicating, storms that are passing by, with a kind of belief that, and to be honest, the levees in the Netherlands are 20 times more enduring than the U.S. ones. So there's a thing to discuss, but there's that makes it also like. That somehow acknowledges what you were saying, that this is nice. So I'd say simply live with this invisibility is stressed by that. I remember I lived once in Kenya, no water problems, and I had to make a house for, say, one person that was the prime minister at that moment in Kenya, and he wanted to have a house on the Central Rift Valley. So that one of the most extraordinary places, I mean, out of Africa is there. And so I was excited by it. And as a West European, I thought, I have to put that house on the edge like a balancing house on top of the... And then he said, no. He said, no. I want to have a house that's like 100 meters from there so I can walk to the viewing point. This is still, for me, I was 18 years, and it was still one of the lessons that I learned, how sometimes this kind of disconnection that you were referring at is also a beauty and to stress in that way. So the last example I give before is that at the moment we are making in the middle of the lakes near to Amsterdam a new city environment. Everyone loves that lake because it's our cosmology. And when you go to the dike, you see endlessness. But of course it's close to Amsterdam and you want to do something about it. I will show an image later. So the key is to make it possible, because everyone hates, as an outsider, that something is happening there. So we make dikes. The dikes the water goes with reed into the dike system. You don't see a house from Amsterdam, but there are only seagulls that are floating above in this area, and that indicates the new city. So when you're driving around in 5 years' time over there, and you see the seagulls, you know that you're almost home. So that's another way of living with the invisibility. It is a poetic of another kind of, say, mirage that basically is then in the middle of that water, and is somehow an expression of the contradiction that we are talking about.
Thanks. I think it's a good way to finish. Milota, we're out of time. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry, Guinness. So Vini Mas is going to be speaking next in the keynote lecture. First, we're going to have a coffee break. So refresh yourselves, come back for Vini's lecture. And also don't forget that Adrian Benapia is speaking tomorrow morning in the first keynote lecture of the day. And I think you'll find a lot more really great information from Adrian. So thank you.